Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this course demonstration. I'm Stephen Olson, the Faculty Director of the Villanova Graduate Tax Program and a professor here at the law school. Today, I'll provide a brief overview of the program and our pedagogy, which I'll then follow up with a walkthrough of what a typical week would look like in a graduate tax class, demonstrating this with our online learning management system, which is called Blackboard. So first, just a little bit about the program. The graduate tax program confers 2 degrees. The first is a Master's of Taxation degree, which is given to CPAs or other business professionals. It requires 30 credit hours, which is 12 classes, plus a legal reasoning module, which is sort of a crash course in law school and how we train lawyers here at Villanova. It's possible to complete this degree in 2 years with never taking 2 classes at the same time. We also offer an LLM for lawyers to gain more knowledge about the tax law. The LLM requires 24 credits, which is 9 courses, and can be done in 18 months, again, without ever having to take 2 classes at the same time. All the JDs, accountants, and other business professionals in the program take classes together. This is truly interdisciplinary, which we think is really beneficial for our program, as each profession approaches these issues differently, allowing all the students to learn from one another and the professor at the same time. In addition to those 2 degrees, we also confer 3 certificates. We've got a certificate in estate planning, 1 in employee benefits, and 1 in SALT. It's possible to take those just standalone certificates, or you can also take them along with a Master's of Taxation or an LLM. Our program is 100% geared towards working professionals, and we know that you all have lots of other professional obligations, family obligations, and other things going on in your lives. And so we're constantly trying to find ways to structure the program with that in mind. So the first is our theory of learning, which is that you are learning best when you're actively engaged in the process. We don't want you zoning out and paying attention to other things while a lecture's going on. And it's not just because we think it's important that you pay attention to us, but we think empirically when you're engaged, it increases the efficiency and the effectiveness of your learning. And we want you to learn as efficiently and as effectively as possible so that you can juggle this program and everything that you have going on in your life. So to do this, we've got an emphasis on low and no stakes assessments. So each week, there are going to be readings, and sometimes there's some pre-recorded content. We'll look at all that through Blackboard shortly. And then we have foundation questions that make sure that the student has comprehended the materials. And again, this is all done through Blackboard, and you'll get immediate feedback when you're taking those questions through the courses, and we'll show you kind of how that works as we go through the program demonstration. After you've done those foundation questions, then you go through and you do a set of bridge problems, and those bridge problems apply facts and some information to what you've learned through the readings and see if you're actually comprehending and able to apply it to fact patterns that clients might bring to you. Again, this is done through the learning management system. These are both the foundation question and the bridge problems, usually about 10 problems, often done multiple choice, fill in the blank, short answer. They're not big essays. They're really shorter assessments. Now, these foundation questions and bridge problems are not graded, but they do have to be done. And you usually do all of this along with that reading and everything before you ever have your live session in the class. So you've done a lot of the foundational work before getting into the live session. So on Wednesday night or Thursday night, then you would be in a live session, either in person here in Villanova or online with the professor and with all the other students together. During that lecture, the professor is going to focus on some of the more difficult concepts, not the foundation issues, but more difficult concepts. And if there have been any issues that many students had with the foundation questions or bridge problems, or perhaps in a prior assessment, the professor is likely going to go over those in the classroom setting with the students and then come up with other problems, other ways to make the live session more interactive for the students. After the students had the live session, then on Friday of that week, each week, weeks 1 through 6, an assessment opens up, and the student can take that assessment at any point between Friday morning and late Sunday afternoon. And that assessment is actually graded, although it's only a very small portion of the student's grade for the semester. The assessment's going to be a lot like what the foundation questions and bridge problems were, usually about 10, often multiple choice, perhaps true, false, fill in the blank, not a big essay type assessment. Then the students are going to do this again, weeks 1 through 6, and then week 7, they'll do everything except for the assessments. And you see there's a little bit of repetition built into this process. And again, we think that repetition is helpful in helping you learn efficiently and effectively. And that's really, again, the goal of all of this, to have you retain as much knowledge as quickly as possible so that you can implement these ideas with your clients as quickly as possible while also doing well in our program. So with that, we'll move into the course demonstration portion. Hold on with me as I switch my screen. So here you should be looking at the Blackboard Learning Management System. This is the primary page that you would log into when you go into your username and password. So here we're not in any specific class, and you can see if you look in the middle of my page, quite a number of courses. Now, I am going to be enrolled in far more than you are because I'm often checking in, seeing how classes are going, how the content looks. You would probably only have a couple classes that you have listed in yours at any given time. But before we get into those class materials, I want to highlight some of the toolbars that are over here on the left-hand side, which can often be useful for students. So the first one, if you click on the top left, is announcements. Here, if you click there, it takes you to the general announcements about the program, but also all of the announcements about courses for that student. So here you can see a couple announcements that came from Unit, our IT group, about issues that Microsoft Edge was having, Blackboard availability for students opening up. But if you keep scrolling down, you see that for our demo class, which is based on an actual class I taught in February, that you see there's information about that class that pops up in the announcement section also. Week 7 PowerPoints are up. So a student who's in one or more classes plus wants to see what all of the announcements are for the graduate tax program can click on that announcements tab and get that information. There's also a calendar function built in, which would list all of your classes, your finals that are upcoming. You can put other items on there if you would like. There's a tasks list that you can include if you want to know what tasks are outstanding, such as foundation or bridge questions, if you have an assessment coming up. There's a My Grades. As I mentioned, weekly there are assessments. And of course, there's final exams. Sometimes there are written assignments that are provided from professors to students. Your grades on all of those would be found in here. In addition, you can look to past grades and classes that you took before this most current semester. You can also send email directly through Blackboard, and this can be useful if you don't recall the students in your class. You want to copy all the students, the professor, and the TA. You can do that through the send email function, then of course an address book, and you can put other information in here about yourself and the classes if you'd like. So let's say you've started a class though, and you want to get started in preparing for the first week of class. You would come into Blackboard, sign in, and you would look for your course here. And the class that we're going to be going into is S. Holson Demo, Fundamentals of Testamentary Estate Planning. So we click on that and it takes you to the main page for the class. And the first thing you see is the announcements section. Now, again, all of these announcements are also pulled to that announcement tab that we saw on the main page, but here are just the announcements for only this class. Here you can see that there was an announcement I made at the beginning of this class, kind of explaining what the class was, what the students could expect throughout the class. And then if you keep scrolling down, there's additional announcements usually. Here I was outlining some information they needed for the first class. It wasn't really substantive legal information though. It was more procedural items, administrative items for the class. Occasionally, however, in this particular class, I did include some substantive information on the announcement tab. So in February, we were discussing IRAs payable to special needs trusts. And at the end of the prior year, at the end of 2022, Secure 2.0 had passed dealing with IRAs. And it actually made some changes as it pertains to having IRAs payable to special needs trusts. That had been a topic. This was sort of in the news. And so I included some information about Secure 2.0 in the announcements tab. That's kind of out of character for me. I would usually use the discussion board for something like that. And we'll talk about that momentarily. But here again, you see PowerPoints are posted, review sessions upcoming, sort of administrative information about the class. So as a new student, right, you're coming into this class and you would probably go over here to the Getting Started tab and you'd click on that. And it really just takes you to a faculty introduction, usually not too much complicated information in the Getting Started tab. And then you would likely want to find your course syllabus. So you would come over here, click course syllabus, and you would click on this. And I need to change my share screen real quick. And so then once you click on that, you download the syllabus for the class. And the syllabus is like other syllabus that you've seen before. Has the general information about the class, an overall course description, what the overall course objectives are. This was a federal estate planning class, federal wealth transfer tax class. Goes over the required text, and then importantly goes over the grading policy for this particular class. So in this class, the weekly assessments, weeks 1 through 6, totaled 30% of the total grade for the students, with the lowest possible one dropped. So only 5 of them counted towards the final grade. In addition, there was a 10% class participation portion of the grade. This would be through discussion in the class, participating in the polling in the class, but then also ensuring that the students complete those foundation and bridge questions. And then the final exam was 60% of the grade. Below that, then it has the course schedule and assignments for each week. Although you probably as a student wouldn't refer back to this though, because in each week, and we'll show this in the module, each week this information is also created for you in Blackboard, so you don't necessarily have to reference back to the syllabus. So again, each week's class, what we're going over, what the reading assignments are, and then general information about the program, email usage, Blackboard, our instructional methods, what's expected of students, the overall grading policy in terms of the letter grade that the student receives in the end, deadlines, academic integrity, kind of the general syllabus stuff. And we need to share a different screen again here, bear with me. And so we should be back in Blackboard now. And let's go back to the course demo. So you've gone through the Getting Started tab. You've looked at the course syllabus. And then we have a handful of other things here on the left-hand side. Here, if you click on this, it gives you instructions about how to log into Zoom. The live class section for a virtual class is going to be in Zoom, just like any other Zoom account that you have. And this gives you the specific information about how to log into the Zoom class for this particular class. Here, if you click on this, are the actual links to the live session. We'll click on that later when we're ready to talk about the live session. And then here are instructions on how to access Zoom recordings. Each of the live sessions will be recorded while the professor is going through the class. So if you happen to miss a class for some reason, a work function comes up or you're ill, you can always go back and watch the pre-recorded class. In addition, and students often do this, if there's really complicated material that you're going over in the lecture, students will go back to the lecture and watch it a second time. It's possible to watch that at increased speeds. And there's also a really great closed captioning function that's very accurate at capturing the discussion that's occurring in class. The frequency with which those videos are rewatched are is pretty high. So these are the directions on how to actually access those in case the student forgets. We've got a support button. If students ever having technical issues, they can click on that. They can open up a ticket for our support team, the IT team unit. Also gives their information in terms of contact. And then we've got accessing weekly assessment feedback, So if you want to know why you got a certain grade on a quiz or what the answer was to a quiz question that you got wrong, this gives you information about how to track all that information down in Blackboard after you've closed out of it. So quickly before we get into the actual first week, here you see discussion board. Not every professor is going to use a discussion board. Some professors use it differently. Some have really robust discussions, and oftentimes in the first class in this program, Survey of Tax, there's a very active discussion board. I used it a little bit. I used it for more substantive responses to students. So if a student emailed me with a really good question that I thought everyone would have benefited from, I would include that in the discussion board. Similarly, if there was a question that came up in class that was a technical issue that I didn't know the answer to off the top of my head, I would then respond to the entire class on the discussion board with that, so everyone could benefit from the response. Students were also encouraged to chime in and encouraged to post their own topics in the discussion board for others to review and for the professor to respond on. And so again, these were usually substantive issues that we talked about. State death taxes weren't a primary concern of this class, but I created a post here on the discussion board that had those resources about each state's death tax through the ACTech webpage, posted it here, and we had a student chime in just about their particular state where they were residing and the death taxes. So again, not necessarily going to be used in every one of your classes, but sometimes will be used. Again, if it is used and there's a class participation grade, then reviewing that and posting to it's important. And it's all teacher by teacher specific. But now let's say you've gone through the getting started, the course syllabus tab, and you're ready to actually dive into week one of your class. So what you would do is you would come over here to that left-hand side. We've got this introductory week, which is just introductory materials. Again, telling you about deadlines for assignments, instructional method. And then over here, we've got week one. Now, we only built out week one in this because it's a demo course, but normally you would have at least weeks 1 through 7 on that left-hand side. And sometimes you'd have weeks 1 through 8 if there was an 8th week of instruction or materials needed for the 8th week of class. Normally, week 8 is the final for a class, but sometimes, some outliers, there could be actual materials for that 8th week. And I should note what we're showing with the demo here is in line with our pedagogy and generally what the courses are. But there are some classes that are outside of this. So we do have a few classes that focus primarily on drafting, like drafting partnership agreements, or drafting estate planning documents. We have some that are focused on controversy. And those classes tend to have more written assignments, oral presentations, not sort of in line with exactly what we're showing here. So here, this is probably going to cover 85% of the classes, what it looks like, but there will be a few that are slightly different because their focus is different. But again, we've got week one here. Normally you'd see all the weeks listed out, but here we'll just go into week one. And this is where you would live for that week for the class. So you click on that tab and first, we see the objectives. Again, these are going to be the same objectives that were listed for that week in the syllabus. And once again, this was fundamentals of testimony estate planning class focused on the federal estate tax and the generation skimming transfer tax. So before we could jump into those really complicated items, we had to make sure that the students understood sort of the fundamentals of estate planning, and we had to make sure that they recalled all the fundamentals of the federal estate and GST tax, which they would have learned in wealth tax before having this class. But so you see the objectives for this week one are kind of in line with that. Then you would go down if you want to know what your readings are. Of course, you could look at the syllabus, but they are recreated here for you, so you don't have to go back to the syllabus. You can just stay in Blackboard. Here we see that we had chapters 19, which is the forms chapter, and 4 and 5 of the textbook that were assigned. This was actually a physical hard copy textbook. I think they could have bought a digital version of it. Many of the classes still have a text in that way. Others will rely on treatises or articles that are available through the various online services that all of our students have access to for free while they're students of the program. This one required an actual textbook. We also see here posted online estate gift tax FAQs about making large gifts. So this is another required reading that the students weren't previously told to get ahead of time, but the students don't have to just try to go out and Google that and figure out what we were talking about. If you scroll further down, you see the additional materials tab. We'll click on that in 1 sec. So as a student, right, you would be doing all this reading. You would go through those chapters, read it on your own. You would then come down to the additional materials tab, click on that, and it takes us to a set of links and information. So the first one was required reading, state and gift tax FAQ on the IRS website. And so if we click on it, And bear with me, I just want to make sure this is, sharing the right screen here. So we've got the FAQs that popped up, and the FAQs here deal with potential clawback of large gifts in 2025. So the federal estate tax law currently states that there's an exemption for 2023 of $12.92 million. That's indexed for inflation, will continue to go up. But at the end of 2025, that exemption falls by half. So it'll go down to $5 million, but it's been indexed for inflation. So probably about $6.5 million of a federal estate tax exemption. The gift tax exemption is a unified credit with the estate tax exemption, so it's the same amount. So many very wealthy people before 2026 are going to make gifts of the 12.92 million or whatever amount it is in that particular year to use up all of their exemption. The question before the IRS was what happens if that occurs and then we go back to a lower exemption in 2026? Is it going to be clawed back, or those amounts can be pulled back into this individual's taxable gifts or estate when they pass away, or are they going to have to pay gift or estate tax? The answer is no under current rules, and this FAQ goes over that. So you've read your FAQs as required by the class, and we come back here and you'll notice there's a number of other readings and items here. So an affidavit of heirship for someone who claimed to be the child of Prince, the music artist. We've got an inventory from Prince's estate, all the things that were included in it. We've got all of the documents related to the administration of Prince's estate from Minnesota, and then a Rolling Stone article about the settlement of Prince's estate. I pieced together that in week 1 of this class, we used Prince's estate as an example of, what is good estate planning, what goes into the estate administration, and how do we calculate sort of what the basic taxable estate would be for federal estate tax purposes. These other materials were not required for the course, but they were put out there just in case the students had some interest in learning a little bit more about the topic we discussed in class. So after you've done these readings and you go back to week 1, we're still not ready for that live session. We scroll down with what is in week 1, and we see, we have some pre-recorded content in this class. And so professors will use the pre-recorded content for a number of different things. This in particular for class 1 was sort of a background, some foundational issues, the basics of estate planning, the basics of the marital deduction, and the basics of the wealth tax, things that we didn't want to spend time going over in the actual class. We wanted the students to have a refresher on this, but we didn't want to take our valuable class time to talk about these, what we'll call basic issues. So if you click on this, it takes you to presentation regarding these fundamentals of estate planning. You can click on it. Hopefully I have the volume off.
And when she passed away.
Turn that off. So as I mentioned, this professor was using the pre-recorded content as introductory materials to set those foundational rules for the students. That's not always how it's used, though. Sometimes, again, a professor will use this as explanation for bridge problems, for instance. So if the students had particularly difficult bridge problems assigned to them, and the professor thought that just the written response was insufficient to ensure that they fully understood it, they could record some content for the students to be able to listen to and get a verbal explanation for those problems. So as a student, once you've kind of gone over the pre-recorded content, we can close out of that. And we're still not ready for the live session with the professor yet. So you've done all of your self-directed learning in terms of reading and watching the video. Now it's time to actually start doing those no stakes assessments. So the first one we have are the foundation questions. And again, this is all going to be done through Blackboard. Here, you click on that link to foundation questions, and it says begin. Here, we didn't build out 10 separate questions, but we've got a couple questions regarding some estate planning basics. And so as a student, you would read this, figure out what you think the answer is. Again, you do the same thing with question 2. And we've got 3 of these. So we've answered our questions. We're confident in our responses. Now we say save and submit. It says we've completed it, and then we hit OK. And immediately it tells us how we did on this class. or these foundation questions in the class. I did very poorly. Apparently I got them all wrong. So oftentimes it's not included in this, and we'll see examples of it in the bridge problems and the assessments, but oftentimes you will have an explanation. So here I got the answer wrong because I should have checked all of them, and it'll tell you why I should have checked all of them. Similarly, the answer is everything, I guess, except for C. Once again, you would have an explanation as to the correct answer is A, B, D, and here's why. And so let's close out of here. We've got our foundation questions all finished. And then it's time to go to the bridge problems. We click on that. Same exact sort of interface. Hit begin. And then you see here, right, we've got a little bit more in terms of a fact pattern outline. So it's not just reading comprehension, what is included in a taxable estate. Instead, here we've got these specific items and then a distribution. How does that impact the income taxes? Who receives, the income tax that's going to flow out of the estate? So we've built out more of a problem set that you would see in real practice, numbers and examples. You go through and you select the answers that you think are appropriate. Now we're confident we've got these correct. We hit save and submit. Confirm that it was submitted. We hit OK. And let's see, I did equally as poorly. So in question number 1, you see the question recreated. I picked Jenny. The answer should have been Max. And then if we scroll down a little bit further, we see actual response feedback. Here, there's an explanation as to why Max was the correct choice. And then we have an explanation as to why Jimmy, Sandy, and Jenny were the incorrect choices. So not only are we telling you why the answer was the correct answer, whether you got it right or wrong, we're also telling you why those other ones were incorrect answers. Oh, and I actually did get this one correct. Yay. But I got points in this demo version. And once again, here we go. This was a qualified disclaimer question, and it explains again what a qualified disclaimer is and why that would have applied for Joy and not the others. All right, at this point, you'd be done with your self-guided work for the week, and it would be time for the live session, either on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night. And so to get to that, you go over to the link to the weekly live session in Zoom and Blackboard. You click on that. Then you hit launch here, and it takes you to an interface where all of your upcoming class Zooms would be. And you would click on the right one here to start the actual class. It would pop up that live session with you and the professor and all the other students participating together. We didn't create a Zoom here. I don't know what happens when you open a Zoom inside of a Zoom. So we're going to go back, but I can show you generally kind of what that experience is like. We do have the slide deck for that class up. So actually, before I get there, each week I tended to post the slides before class. And so if you click here where it says slides, it takes you to a new screen, week PowerPoint. You click on this and it automatically downloads those slides for you. Some professors won't actually have those until after class. Perhaps they'll have answers to assessments, or they may have like interactive aspects about the class where they've created new problem sets that are on one slide with the answers on the other. And so they'll wait, but usually they will provide you with the slides either before or after class. So the live session would look a whole lot like this Zoom, except for with screen sharing of the slides for that class. And so you would go through the class, and as I mentioned, the class would have more difficult lecture topics, wouldn't be the foundational issues, it'd be covering more of the complicated items for the class. There'd also be some probably review of prior assessments, especially if the students hadn't done particularly well on them. And then, as I mentioned, some discussions of sort of new tax laws that have been proposed and how it could impact all the wealth taxes. basics of estate planning. As I mentioned, a bit of discussion about Prince's estate, the value of his assets. And then you see here, we've got a slide where this was a poll question. So there was discussion about how this language would actually impact the distribution of assets, followed by an explanation what the correct answer was. And then you see a lot of these slides are kind of question and answer, things that would be posed to the students, and you start a discussion with the students, between the students and each other and the faculty, with the faculty guides, helps them learn about some drafting techniques here. And that is what the live session would largely look like. So I'm going to share screens back to Blackboard. So again, we would go, once that live session is over, you would go back into your week one. You'd scroll down. And once Friday morning started, sometime over the weekend, you would open up the assessment. And now you would take the low stakes assessment, the actual quiz problem set. Again, 6 quizzes for this semester. In this particular class, only 5 of them counted towards grades, and the total was 30% of the grade overall. Here, you may not have noticed before, but the instructions are a little bit different this time. It says here, this test has a time limit of 1 hour. So once the student starts it, they have 1 hour to complete the assessment. You can hit begin. And again, this looks different up top here. It says the test is 1 hour time limit. And then there are going to be notifications to you when you're at the 30-minute mark, when there's 5 minutes to go, when there's 1 minute to go, and then when there's 30 seconds to go. So you don't have to be separately checking and watching that the timer is you're still going. You're not going to run over. It will provide you with notifications when the time is starting to dwindle. And once again, this is going to look a lot like the foundation questions and the bridge problems. So here we've got this question. Just going to select the answer you think is correct. Here we've got another question. And once we're very confident that we have our questions correct, we'll hit save and submit. Confirmation that we're submitted, and then okay. Same as the bridge and foundation questions. It's going to take us to our immediate grade in it. Here I apparently picked the correct one, 10 out of 10 points. And then just like the foundation and bridge questions, you're going to get response feedback. It's going to tell you what the correct answer is, what the incorrect answers are, and why that's the case. So with the foundation and the bridge questions and problems, as you're going through, if you happen to do very poorly on certain areas, you'll know that those are areas that you need to circle back on, spend some more time with the readings, perhaps watch some other pre-recorded content on it. With the assessments, same deal. Hopefully you've done very well in the assessments, but if there are areas that the assessments show are still lacking, the professor might talk about those in the next class. But you also know that as you prepare for the final in week 8, that those might be areas that you need to spend a little extra attention to. And that is sort of the complete run through of 1 week. As I mentioned, you do the same thing weeks 1 through 6. In week 7, it would be a little bit different again, because there is no assessment. In week 7, you would be starting to prepare for the final exam after that class, so there's no assessment. And then in week 8, your final would always be on a Tuesday. Finals are always Tuesdays in this program. And you would access that final the same way that you did sort of the assessments and the other materials through Blackboard. So with that, I hope that you found this to be a useful explanation of the program, explanation of our pedagogy, and a good sort of example of what a week would kind of look like if you were in this class, taking a virtual class and using our learning management system. Of course, if you have any questions about any of those topics, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. I'm more than happy to talk about the program at any time, and we've got other great staff who are also more than happy to talk to you at any point about this. And you can find our contact information on this slide. Thanks again so much, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in the program soon. Bye.